The Dolly Madison Mansion in Washington, D.C., is a well-known site for ghostly legends, especially those involving the spirit of Dolly Madison herself. According to lore, Dolly's ghost can be seen in the garden, lovingly caring for the flowers she had planted in her lifetime. Even after her passing, staff and visitors report seeing her figure dressed in antique clothing, appearing serene and focused on her gardening tasks. Inside the mansion, her spirit is sometimes spotted wandering the hallways in period dress, adding an eerie, historical charm to the building's ambience. The most famous story about her ghost involves a time when the White House garden was being redone. Gardeners were reportedly given instructions to dig up the roses Dolly had planted, but her apparition appeared to them, refusing to let her beloved roses be disturbed. Afterward, the flowers were left untouched out of respect or perhaps a touch of fear. This tale is a fascinating example of how historical figures become woven into ghostly legends, especially in Washington, D.C., where so many old buildings have stories of famous spirits linked to them. As the legend goes, the staff of the Dolly Madison Mansion became accustomed to the occasional, inexplicable scent of roses drifting through the halls, even in the dead of winter. Visitors would often remark on the scent, unaware that roses weren't in bloom, nor were there any fresh bouquets around. Soon, people began to whisper that Dolly's spirit was lingering in the house, her presence tied to the memories of her beloved gardens. One evening, a young historian named Clara was working late in the mansion's library, surrounded by records of the house's long history. She was engrossed in her research, barely noticing as the hours slipped by and the sky darkened. The faint rustling of papers on the desk in front of her was the only sound until she heard a soft, almost imperceptible footfall behind her. She froze, her heart pounding as she strained her ears, but there was only silence. Convinced it was her imagination, Clara returned to her work, brushing it off as the creaking of the old floorboards. But then, a faint scent of roses filled the room. She glanced around, scanning the dim corners of the library. Her eyes widened as she caught sight of a shadow moving past the doorway, slow and graceful, as if someone was gliding along the floor. Clara stood and stepped into the hallway, her curiosity overwhelming her sense of caution. The shadow led her towards the garden, where moonlight illuminated the plants in a silvery glow. As she stepped outside, she saw a figure in the garden, bent over the rose bushes. The woman wore a pale, flowing dress from another era, her posture serene as she carefully tended to each flower with delicate, practiced hands. Her hair was pinned up in a style Clara had only seen in old portraits, and the wide-brimmed bonnet she wore cast a gentle shadow across her face. Clara's breath caught as she watched the figure work, seemingly unaware of her presence. The woman's movements were precise and graceful, as though she had done this 1,000 times before, her hands lightly brushing over the roses as though they were dear old friends. Feeling a mix of awe and trepidation, Clara took a step forward, trying to get a better look. The figure suddenly paused, her head tilting slightly as if sensing she was being watched. Clara held her breath, half expecting the figure to vanish. But instead, the woman turned slowly, her face finally visible under the moonlight, a face that bore a striking resemblance to the portraits of Dolly Madison that lined the mansion's walls. The woman looked at Clara, her expression soft but piercing. For a moment, Clara felt as though she were being measured, as if this apparition were deciding whether she was welcome in this sacred, spectral garden. The air was thick with an unspoken understanding, a silent exchange between the living and the dead. Then, in a voice as soft as the breeze through the roses, the figure spoke. "You've come to tend to what's been forgotten," she said, her words carrying a weight that lingered in the chilly night air. Before Clara could respond, the woman lifted a hand and gestured toward a far corner of the garden, where the oldest, most weathered roses bloomed. "These need care the most," the apparition murmured, almost to herself. "They were once cherished and now, like so much else here, they're fading." Clara followed her gaze, feeling a pull toward the roses, as though compelled by some unseen force. She took a hesitant step forward, reaching out to touch one of the delicate, withering petals. As Clara's fingers brushed the petal, A sudden rush of memories flooded her mind, not her own, but glimpses of another time. She saw the garden in vibrant bloom, a colorful tapestry of roses and irises under the bright sun, and she felt the warmth of spring on her skin, heard the faint sound of laughter carried on the breeze. She saw a younger Dolly Madison, full of life, walking these very paths, chatting with friends and family, tending each plant with a care that bordered on devotion. The vision faded, leaving Clara breathless. When she blinked, she was once again in the garden at night, under the pale glow of the moon. The ghostly figure was still watching her, a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes, as though pleased that Clara could see and feel what the garden once was. "You understand now," the spirit whispered, her gaze softening. "These blooms are more than flowers, they're memories, pieces of lives and laughter, fragments of love and loss. A garden holds the essence of its keeper, even after they've gone." Clara nodded, her heart racing as she began to feel an inexplicable bond with the woman before her. There was a familiarity, a sense that they were connected across the centuries by a shared love for the beauty that still lingered here. The figure took a step closer, reaching out as if to touch Clara's shoulder, but her hand hovered just an inch away. "The house, too, remembers," Dolly's spirit continued, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "Every room, every corner, holds echoes of those who've walked here. You must listen to them, care for them, as you care for this garden." Her voice faded, and she took another step back, her form beginning to dissolve into the night air. But before she vanished entirely, Dolly fixed Clara with one final, meaningful look. "Promise me," she said, her voice now barely a whisper, "that you will keep alive what others have left behind." And with that, she was gone, leaving Clara alone in the garden. The scent of roses lingered, but the chill of night had returned, and the silence felt heavy, as though the garden itself were holding its breath. Clara stood there, her heart pounding, feeling the weight of a promise unspoken, yet binding. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Clara remained rooted to the spot, gazing at the empty space where Dolly Madison's ghost had stood only moments before. The garden was still, the moon casting long shadows across the ancient roses. She felt as if something important had shifted inside her, as though she were now a part of the mansion's living history, bound by an unbreakable vow. The quiet was soon interrupted by the distant sound of a clock chiming midnight, its echoes reverberating through the night. Shaken from her reverie, Clara took a deep breath and turned back toward the mansion, her thoughts racing. What did Dolly mean by listening to the house? Did she mean there were other spirits within its walls? Other stories waiting to be uncovered? As she walked through the creaking halls back to her study, Clara noticed things she hadn't before. The faint shadows stretching in unusual patterns, the sensation of warmth in certain rooms, as though someone had just left. She paused outside the parlor, where portraits of former residents adorned the walls. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw a flicker of movement in one of the mirrors, just at the corner of her eye. Compelled by an urge she couldn't quite explain, Clara approached the largest painting in the parlor, a stately portrait of Dolly Madison herself, gazing out with that same knowing look she'd seen in the garden. Clara's fingers trembled as she reached out, tracing the edges of the frame, and felt something rough and uneven on the backside of it. She turned the frame slightly and discovered an envelope wedged behind it, sealed and yellowed with age. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, she pulled the envelope free and examined it under the dim light. In faded ink, a name was scrawled across the front: "To those who truly seek." Clara's hands shook as she carefully broke the brittle seal and unfolded the letter within. The writing was in Dolly's delicate script, each line flowing elegantly across the page. "If you have found this," the letter began, "then you are meant to be here, drawn by history's quiet call. The stories of this house are precious, and its secrets are many. You must honor them, guard them, and uncover what I could not." Clara's breath caught as she read on, each word revealing fragments of Dolly's life, her love for her family, and hints at something hidden, something she could only trust to someone who would one day truly understand. The final line struck Clara with a chill, The garden and the house hold more than mere memories. They hold a key. Clara's eyes scanned the room, her mind spinning. A key? She folded the letter carefully, a sense of resolve building within her. She knew now that her late-night research had only scratched the surface of the mansion's mysteries. And as she stood alone in the shadowed silence, she realized that she was no longer just a researcher cataloging history, she was now a part of it, charged with uncovering something hidden deep within these walls. The letter hinted at secrets locked away, perhaps known only to Dolly herself, yet left for someone else to discover. Clara slipped the letter into her pocket and glanced around the room, her gaze falling on the antique furniture and the gleaming mirrors. The mansion felt alive, its silence heavy with anticipation, as though it, too, were waiting for her next move. She walked slowly toward the staircase, each creak of the old wood beneath her feet echoing through the quiet. As she reached the second floor, she noticed a narrow door at the end of the hallway, one she hadn't paid much attention to before. It was slightly ajar, revealing a dark space beyond. Clara approached, her heart pounding, and pushed the door open to reveal a narrow, spiraling staircase leading up into the mansion's attic. The attic was rumored to be the most haunted part of the house, a place where no one dared to venture alone. Yet something, perhaps the lingering scent of roses or the soft whisper of Dolly's voice in her memory, compelled Clara forward. She climbed the steps, the air growing colder as she ascended, until finally, she reached the top. The attic was dim, illuminated only by a sliver of moonlight through a dusty window. Ancient trunks and forgotten artifacts lay scattered around, covered in layers of dust. Clara began to search, her fingers grazing over old furniture and crates, feeling for anything that might stand out. As she reached a large, ornately carved chest, something caught her eye, a faint shimmer along the edge of the wood. She knelt down, brushing the dust away, revealing a small brass lock embedded in the side. Her heart quickened as she recalled Dolly's word. The garden and the house hold more than mere memories. They hold a key. She fumbled in her pocket for the letter, hoping it might offer another clue. But as she unfolded it, something small and metallic slipped from between the pages, a tiny, antique key with intricate engravings. Clara's fingers trembled as she held it up to the lock on the chest. It was a perfect match. Taking a deep breath, she fit the key into the lock and turned it slowly. The mechanism clicked, and the lid of the chest creaked open, revealing a collection of items wrapped carefully in velvet cloth, each one preserved as if awaiting a future discovery. Clara's fingers gently peeled back the cloth, revealing a leather-bound journal, its cover worn yet intact, bearing the initials DM. She opened the journal, its pages filled with Dolly Madison's meticulous handwriting, detailing thoughts, memories, and moments she had never shared with anyone. As Clara skimmed through the entries, she realized that this was no ordinary journal. Dolly had recorded not just her personal life but also strange occurrences within the mansion, mysterious sounds in the night, flickering lights, and, more startlingly, encounters with figures she described as phantoms of history. She spoke of her own experiences feeling watched, of whispers echoing in empty rooms, and of dreams that seemed almost prophetic. One passage, near the back, caught Clara's attention. There is a place beneath this house, hidden well and protected by those who came before. It was entrusted to me, but I was never able to unlock its mystery. I have left clues, scattered like petals, for one who might find them and uncover what lies below. Clara's pulse quickened. A hidden place beneath the mansion? She recalled the vague references Dolly had made to a key within the house and garden. Could there be another layer to this mystery? Something literally buried beneath the foundation? As she read on, Dolly's journal offered one last clue. A small map, crudely sketched on the final page, showing the layout of the garden and a particular marker near the oldest rose bush. Clara closed the journal, her mind racing. She knew that if she wanted to uncover the mansion's deepest secret, she would have to return to the garden. Gathering the journal and the velvet-wrapped items, she made her way back down the staircase, through the silent mansion, and out into the cool night air. Under the moonlight, the garden looked almost spectral, each shadow seeming to reach toward her. She found the old rose bush Dolly had marked and knelt beside it, brushing her hands through the dirt, feeling for anything unusual. Her fingers struck something hard, a stone buried just beneath the surface. She cleared the soil around it and noticed a small handle on one side, as though it were a door or hatch of some kind. With a deep breath, she tugged on the handle, and the stone shifted, revealing a dark, narrow passage descending into the earth. A cold breeze rose from below, carrying with it the faintest hint of roses and something else, something ancient and powerful. Clara hesitated at the edge of the passage, peering into the darkness, knowing that whatever lay below had waited centuries to be found. Clara's pulse raced as she gazed into the pitch-black passage, feeling a strange pull to descend. Summoning all her courage, she took a flashlight from her bag, clicked it on, and carefully lowered herself down the stone steps, each one uneven and worn with age. The air grew colder as she descended, and the silence deepened, absorbing even the sound of her footsteps. Her flashlight beam caught glints of damp walls, etched with faint, barely discernible symbols, markings she recognized from her research as protection symbols, perhaps placed here centuries ago by those who sought to guard whatever lay at the end of this hidden passage. At last, the narrow stairway opened into a small, vaulted chamber, its walls lined with stone shelves holding objects cloaked in dust and mystery. In the center of the room stood a large, intricately carved pedestal, and on top of it rested an ancient box, wrapped in silver chains that seemed to glint with an unnatural sheen. Clara approached slowly, feeling an inexplicable reverence, as though she were in the presence of something sacred or forbidden. She reached out, her hand hovering over the box, feeling a strange warmth radiating from it. On its surface were carvings of roses intertwined with ivy, symbols she recognized from Dolly's journal as representing memory and legacy. Beneath the carvings was a lock with a small, unusual keyhole, one that looked identical to the key she'd used to open the chest in the attic. With trembling fingers, she retrieved the key, took a steadying breath, and slid it into the lock. The chains loosened, falling away with a soft clink that echoed through the chamber. She slowly lifted the lid, revealing a stack of brittle, yellowed documents and a small vial containing a dark, shimmering liquid. Her flashlight caught something written on the top document, a message scrawled in Dolly's own hand, to protect those who come after. Clara scanned the papers, her heart pounding as she realized what she held: a collection of secrets, contracts, and letters exchanged by figures throughout history, some dating back to the early days of the country. Many were marked with cryptic symbols, detailing agreements that hinted at strange alliances, hidden powers, and a legacy far beyond anything she'd ever imagined. But it was the vial that held her attention, its contents swirling as if alive. Dolly's final entry in the journal had mentioned a key to preserving all that must endure, and Clara sensed this vial held the essence of that promise, something meant to protect, or perhaps, to unlock yet another mystery. As she held the vial up to the light, a faint glow emerged from within, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her, a gentle warmth, and the scent of roses enveloped her. She turned, expecting to see Dolly's spirit, but instead, she found herself alone, bathed in a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to emanate from the chamber itself. The realization dawned on her. Whatever secrets Dolley Madison had guarded in her lifetime, they were now Clara's to protect. She would have to decide how to honor Dolly's legacy and safeguard the powerful secrets she had uncovered. Clara stood in the silence of the hidden chamber, feeling the weight of generations upon her. The vial's soft glow seemed to pulse, as if waiting for her decision. Her mind raced with possibilities. She could expose the documents and rewrite history, but that might also unleash forces best left hidden. Or she could preserve the secrets, following in Dolly's footsteps to guard the legacy meant to protect future generations. With a deep breath, Clara knew what she had to do. She carefully re-wrapped the documents and set them back in the box, closing the lid and fastening the chains back in place. She slipped the vial into her pocket, feeling its warmth against her, a reminder of the power it held and the responsibility she now carried. As she began to ascend the stairs, leaving the ancient chamber behind, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She reached the top and closed the stone hatch, covering it once again with dirt and rose petals from the nearby bush, as if sealing away the mysteries for someone else to discover, perhaps centuries later. In the moonlit garden, Clara felt a gentle breeze, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of roses. She sensed a presence beside her, a soft, warm energy that filled her with peace. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see Dolly, but there was only the quiet beauty of the garden, filled with shadows and whispers. "Thank you," Clara whispered, feeling that Dolly's spirit was, at last, at rest. With a heart both heavy and light, Clara returned to the mansion, knowing she was now the keeper of its secrets, bound to protect its legacy, and forever connected to the spirit of Dolly Madison. And as she stepped inside, the scent of roses lingered, fading slowly, as if Dolly herself were finally saying goodbye. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.